So last week I talked about how the pouring technique can affect your extraction. Well, this week I wanted to follow up and add another layer and talk about how even something as simple as the pouring height can change the extraction. Now, if you guys are new here, my name is Vincent and I'm the head roaster for Tales Coffee. And if you love educational and experimental videos, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you can get the latest updates on my newest techniques. So as boring and as thoughtless as this topic may seem, I actually think that the pouring height is extremely important to talk about. Now, you might have seen some other YouTubers or myself, and we pour from a consistent height, but sometimes I might go up, sometimes I might go down. On a very more complicated level, it can actually make a huge impact on how your coffee tastes. So you might be thinking, what does the pouring height actually change? And if you've watched my last week's video, you might have guessed. It's the amount of agitation we cause to our coffee bed. Now, let's start with pouring a little bit closer to the coffee. When we pour a little bit closer to the coffee bed, we're able to get a much more gentle kind of entry point. And in fact, it doesn't agitate to the point where the grinds actually naturally lift higher than if we were to pour at a higher point, which causes much more agitation and it causes a drippy effect. So let me show you guys quickly in these two beakers how it's gonna change. So here I've got my beaker and I've got my kettle. I'm gonna first start by pouring low and then I'm gonna work to show you guys what it's like to pour from a higher point. Now, obviously, if we're brewing coffee, we would be pouring into a dripper with coffee beans, but because you can't really see what's going on inside and how much agitation is going on, I decided to simulate it by using a beaker full of water. So in the beginning, when we pour nice and slow, you're not gonna see so much agitation. So you can actually hardly see any of the water movements, okay? But when we work with a higher pour, so when we're pouring from a higher height, you're gonna notice right away that there's a lot more agitation. You can even see the bubbles dig even deeper. So by digging deeper, we cause a lot more agitation. But yeah, let's get back to the side and talk about how this affects our brews. I hope when you saw the second clip that pouring from a higher height, you're gonna get a lot more droplets. That actually causes a much deeper penetration and that actually causes a lot more agitation. Now this causes the beans to sink. So if you don't want your coffee to float quite as quickly, you can actually pour from a higher height. Strange, right? Because you're actually pushing down deeper. It causes so much force that it actually just stays down. Now, on the same note, if you pour from a super high height, you're gonna get droplets. Or if you pour super slowly, you're also gonna get these droplets that come up. Now, I wanted to quickly talk about the droplets because it's kind of like a third alternative to a lower and slower versus your higher and more agitation. There's the droplet technique. The droplet technique is normally used by the Japanese for darker coffees. And like by dark, it's really dark, okay? And that's because they give off a lot of gases. And so when you pour extremely slowly, one drop at a time, the water kind of just sits on the top and the gases kind of forcefully push up. And these droplets slowly take its time to penetrate and extract everything. So that's like the extreme of it. Now, if you imagine these droplets are actually floating on top, then if you look at the other extreme and you pour really close and really gentle to it, you're actually gonna get the water penetrating deeper and it just kind of lifts all the grinds higher. So on one end, if we pour from a higher height, we're gonna get more of a floaty water, whereas if we're pouring from a closer side, we're gonna get more water in the middle. And now we think about what kind of beans we're using and what kind of pouring technique we're gonna be matching it with. So assuming we have the exact same amount of beans in each one of these drippers, let's say, for example, like 20 grams of beans, okay? If we look at it, 20 grams of beans on a Hario V60 could be something like this. And the same amount would be like this on an origami. Notice how much closer it is to the top. And on the little dripper, it's gonna take out most of it. And so when we talk about pouring gentler or stronger from a higher or lower height, it also depends on our drippers and the type of gooseneck kettles that we use. So one technique to be able to control your height is of course to select a smaller dripper, because a smaller dripper allows you to naturally get closer to it, or the closest to it possibly, whereas the V60 02s, the minimum height is already much higher. Another thing that I always suggest to people when it comes down to pouring height is how much we fill our kettles. The more we fill our kettles, the more vertical it will be, and so the spout will naturally just be a lot higher. So if you want to be able to pour really close and really gently, you want to be using a kettle that's not filled too high and maybe a smaller dripper. You might actually get some of your best coffees from something like that. So for me personally, because lighter roasts tend to extract faster and they sink quicker, you want to be able to flush everything up and lift everything up to get the maximum exposure to each grind particles. And so when I brew lighter coffees, I tend to pick a smaller dripper, which allows me to pour closer to it. And this way, I can lift all the grinds up, finish it, and have the full extraction in a very shorter amount of time. But for something like a darker roast, I might want to pour from a higher point because I want to elongate the first drip, allowing me to have a stronger flavor. And so I would pour from a higher height, let it drip a little bit before moving lower and then speeding up the process. So we are actually able to kind of utilize our knowledge of high versus low and then actually kind of combine the two techniques together. So like I said, for the medium to darker roast, I always start a little bit higher. I want to have a couple of drippy, droppy moments. This allows it to kind of just sit on the surface and get the gases to push it away before I start to lift everything up, because it just needs some time to agitate. And so that kind of allows me to make up for the bloom process and allows this one continuous single pour to actually work really well with this kind of coffee. So I thought I'd show you guys a quick demo of what I meant from pouring from a higher height to a lower point. I've got myself the Time War kettle, and then I've got myself the V60-01 just because I can get really nice and close to it. This is one of my favorite setups of all times. As much as I love the Origami, because this is even smaller, I can get an even better brew. So I'm only going to be showing you guys the beginning and how it finishes in the first timer, so I won't be using a scale. This is not a super perfect brew or anything. This is merely to show you how I start from a higher point and going into lower one. The coffee we have here is actually a medium dark that I've roasted for another client of mine. We've been testing around with it. Super happy with it, very low acidity, but there's a lot of gases, and this is why this technique works super well with it. So you want to be able to start nice and high. You can see my kettle's really high up there, and you're gonna start with the drippy, droppy things. So right into the middle, and this is what's gonna cause a lot of agitation for it. And of course, if you sling it around like this, it makes it even higher agitation. So once we've got all the grinds set, we're gonna get our way lower and slowly work back into the middle. Remember last week's video, we talked about how agitation works. Oh, that was just me talking too much. But when you move in and out, you cause a lot of agitation. Now I wanted to show you guys that pouring from a higher height can cause a lot of agitation. If you guys can see, it's already become really foamy, which means I don't actually have to cause much more agitation. There's no darker grinds floating up to the top, and we've pretty much saturated all the grinds. And so, as you can see, pouring from a higher height caused a lot of agitation, which allowed me to fully extract my coffees much earlier. And so this is how I want to be able to control something like this. So of course you're gonna have your stir, but let's be honest here, I don't have a scale. I don't even know my full ratio. So that is roughly what I like to do with a higher agitation pour with a high to low pouring height. As you guys can see, I actually think about each part of the brewing process, and something as small as minute as the pouring height can actually make such a huge difference. So I hope you guys actually play around with your pouring height. Let me know in the comments below what you guys use for your pouring height. Do you like to pour closer? Do you like to pour farther? What are your observations? How has it actually affected your brew? And do your coffees taste any better? So thank you so much for watching. If you guys love this video, make sure to hit the like. And if you haven't already, subscribe to us, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.